Hi, everyone. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Cindy. I love being here. Um, I've got chills because I have the pleasures of introducing you to, if you've never um, spent time with Carol Howe before, or to just hang out here and spend some time with Carol Howe. And before I hand the mic over to her, I'm going to read this bio. That Here we go. Carol Howe is a world-renowned expert on A Course in Miracles, one of its first students and earliest teachers, biographer of ACIM co-scribe, Dr. Bill Thetford. The book is Never Forget to Laugh, and widely known for the clarity and practicality of her work, grounded in science and research with decades of teaching experience. Carol can guide anyone in applying these universal principles to daily life. The other thing, just to highlight before I hand the mic over, is that Carol lives these teachings and has lived these teachings for as long as they've been gifted to humanity. And if you get quiet right now, even before Carol begins to speak, and you set aside your expectations or your resistance or your need to argue against, and just allow the truth to come into you, these next few minutes could change your perception of everything. Yeah. Hi, Carol.
Hey there. Hey there. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I love being here with anybody who is vaguely interested in A Course in Miracles or anything else that's going to help us change our minds in a most important way. This summer, I will be having my 45th anniversary with A Course in Miracles. So I've been around for a long time. I know what we tend to do to get in our way in the beginning. So I like to use my own experience and the experience of so many other people that I've talked to make this easier for either newer people or for those who've been at it for a long time and feel stuck. Like, I just can't make myself do the lessons, or I just can't make myself follow through in some way. And I think especially in the Western world, where I suppose most of us are, the biggest mistake we make is trying to learn this material intellectually. Like, if we could, because after all, it is called a course, and we have been habituated all through our educational experience, however far up it goes, that we're acquiring information that somehow is then later going to be useful or is going to clarify things. This is not about merely acquiring more information. This is much more about rewiring our brains in a very fundamental way. That's what I refer to the lessons as a rewiring device, so to speak. And that especially works for me because as part of my early career, I was a systems engineer with IBM. And so I know a whole lot about debugging programs, looking for the logic errors, because until you find the logic errors, you can't make the programming changes that need to be made. And so this is to help us find, you might say, the logic errors in the things that we believe. So it's not about learning more information. It's about finding out more about what makes us tick, which is different from a big pile of information. So I spent, I'm sure, my first, I don't know how many years working very hard at knowing exactly what this said. I read it over and over and over again, every once in a while, because back at that time, my boys were very young. And so my husband would periodically take them. If it was wintertime, they'd go skiing. If it was summertime, they'd go camping or something like that. And when I started reading the text, when they walked out the door on Friday afternoon, I could read it all the way through by the time they got home on Sunday afternoon. And for some reason at that point, I thought, if I have all this information in my mind at once, that was somehow going to be helpful. So don't bother to do all that. This is not about learning. This is about discovering what our own programming is, what our own beliefs are that are very much getting in the way of our own peace of mind. So that's a very different enterprise than simply learning more material. And the lessons are a very specific kind of daily dose of something to focus your attention on, not to figure out what it means or how does this work or is this really true. But if you focus your attention on the things it asks you to focus on that day, this is a time and space comment that I'm going to make. I like to separate what's metaphysical and what's sort of time and space. So at the time and space level, by focusing on these actually true ideas for 15 seconds or however long it takes to put all of your attention on whatever the lesson for the day may be, we actually start to grow new neural networks in the brain. In other words, I literally am doing reprogramming that way. So we're just asked to focus our attention on these ideas. And then there's going to be a cumulative effect, so to speak, as we continue to do this. The text, of course, is also about our completely changing our minds, but the lessons are so specific with a daily thing to focus your attention on as often as possible. And its purpose is to replace ideas that we have about ourselves and others and our interactions in the world, not compete with them. This is like pulling out a weed and planting a rose bush instead. It's just not to have a big mix of weeds and rose bushes. So that's the goal of the entire thing. And absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, this is my personal prejudice because I grew up in a metaphysically friendly household. So I started being introduced to Eastern philosophy and, unusual healing techniques and so on from the time I was a little girl. I didn't come upon that later on in life and, reading the autobiography of a yogi and all that kind of stuff. So my search for meaning, so to speak, and what's really true began very early. I didn't just stumble across that didn't become an interest in midlife. And I've had a very long life at this stage of the game. But I can remember when we moved to, I moved from one town to another when I was 6 years old. And I grew up in the Episcopal Church. And at that point, it was a very sort of an intellectual as compared to hellfire and damnation kind of a Christian church. And I remember the first time going to the church in the new town. And even as a little girl, it was a very lovely man who was the minister. And he was saying whatever he was saying in a typical Episcopal church sermon. And some part of me that had nothing to do with the being a little girl human being part said, this isn't true. This isn't really how this is. And so from the time I was little, there was this sense of knowing things or something that had nothing to do with my age or what I had learned. It was just kind of guidance would just insert itself. In fact, I learned when I was early on, okay, in this lifetime, you're supposed to only know things when you have learned them, like in school or Sunday school. So I had to keep separated out what it was okay for parents or somebody else to know that I knew because I learned that, and what I knew because I just knew it. So it's like this interest has been with me for as long as I can remember, and I will go out of my physical existence, whenever that is, with this still being the centerpiece of what life's all about for me. Not only for my own personal reason, but I adore finding different new ways to try to make what it's saying to us, that we need to change our mind about fundamentally what we think we are in the first place. In other words, we're not a thing. We don't live in a body. And you can't just throw those ideas out to the world at large and expect anybody to pay any attention to you. So just finding ways, finding metaphors and so on to make this, it's not so much to make it sensible, but to say, try this and see what happens. In other words, see for yourself what happens when you apply these ideas in this way. And if somebody said, you have to, in, I don't know, like a minute and a half, say, what does this course say? What it says is, for those of you who already are course students, there's a statement that many people know about that talks about, in the latter part of the text, about the tiny mad idea at which we remembered not to laugh. And the tiny mad idea is that somehow we have managed to make ourselves guilty, to corrupt the whatever it is that we really are, to leave home, however you want to say that. So it says, that's what you fear, that's what you carry guilt about. A lot of that guilt is unconscious, yet nevertheless affecting your whole life experience. It's a big lie. It's not true. And that guilt is going to be released in favor of a whole different take on yourself and others through your relationships. So it's like, the problem is you believe that guilt is reasonable, which it isn't. And you do that by recognizing, and this would be the other big truth, you cannot heal alone. You can't sit in your house and go, okay, yes, I believe this about myself, and now I'm just going to change my mind and I'm really a good person after all. It's like, nope. You do that in combination with people you don't like, that you think are the problem, that you think have mistreated you, that you think whatever all else you may think about them. And it's like, are we willing to see that the reality of them, the truth of them, is actually innocent, good, undefiled? We have to separate the body, personality, words, and deeds from the eternal life presence, conscious awareness, whatever you want to call it, the presence that you realize is missing if you look at a dead body, the presence of us. So yes, the body personality can be a mess, but that doesn't touch the truth of us. And getting that sorted out and learning to do our own letting go of what we feel guilty about and hold against ourselves through our willingness that those that we feel are the enemies or have mistreated us in some way are equally as innocent and undefiled in their reality as we want ourselves to be. So it's like if you were going to take all those words and reduce it to the actual practical, this is what it wants for us, this is it. Any questions?
I do actually have a question. I'm lulled into the state. It is some version I've been asking pretty much everyone that I've done either this Facebook Live with or prep work with in terms of what's going on in the world today, because it's the same question I hear in all the meeting rooms I'm moving in and out of right now.
Mhm.
What do I do? What do I do when I turn my attention towards the Ukraine and I see what appears to be one insane man killing, indiscriminately? How do I utilize everything you're talking about um, with the pain, that I'm experiencing when I see such suffering and devastation?
Okay, those are two different things. The first one is when we feel distress, when we feel emotional distress, it's triggered by it doesn't matter what. In this particular case, the example that you give, it's like we need to set aside, and nobody teaches this. I've always said, if I could just make the whole world stop for 10 minutes and I could say one thing, it would be this, which is, it's part of the we are never upset for the reason I think, that fabulous lesson number 5. It's like, you must set the story aside. In this particular case of your example, it would be, I'm upset because of the horrors going on in Ukraine. It's like, set that aside and go, I'm now going to deal strictly with my own emotional state right now. I'm going to allow myself to feel the sensations in the body, no story about what I think it's about. And I'm going to allow, you might feel tightness in your chest or your throat or your stomach. Those are the main areas because we process emotions in the abdominal area, time and space circumstance. And once I feel like I have sort of restored some sort of equilibrium, that's kind of the short-term thing we have to do. Then I can do the long term of going, I'm never upset for the reason I think, so that the horror that's happening over there by somebody else, that's a trigger, not a cause. What it's triggering is a great fear or guilt, and it may be unconscious to us. That doesn't mean it's not functional just because we're not aware of it, of our own transgressions, of our own mistreatment of people. Now, we may not have done the butchery that is going on in some of those other places, but our intent has been malicious in many ways, or we think people should suffer, or we don't like them, or we dismiss them in some way. So remembering that cause and effect is always in the same moment, so that if I'm feeling distress at 10:05 in the morning, the cause is not from somewhere or someplace else. It's because of whatever it is I'm aware of has triggered my own guilt, that I have destroyed myself. And this is giving me an opportunity to begin to see what I am holding against myself. I'm projecting it out all over the place. But my problem is what I am holding against myself. And only I can let it go. I have some darling, dear friends who live in Kiev. I've been to Ukraine a half a dozen times. I've done Course in Miracles workshops in cathedrals over there. I mean, I have a real attachment to that part of the world. And people have said, and I believe it, that Kiev is the most beautiful city in the world. It's 1700 years old. Its official founding date is like 482 or something like that. But many of the cathedrals and gorgeous places and everything else are like 800-900 years old in that life cycle. And it's the whole history, as well as, and the places and the parks and the other amazing places that, I don't like to think of not only what happens to the people, but what happens to the beautiful place as well, with all of the history of that part of the world. Now, my very dear friends have left Kiev, where they live, and they're over in Lviv now, as many people are, and they're feeling safe at the moment. But they are definitely, I've been in touch with them, they're definitely having to put course principles into practice. They are right there in the midst of this. They aren't looking at it from a couple of thousand miles away. And they're listening to the audiobook of Never Forget to Laugh and remembering what Bill had to say, and they're being course students doing what they can do to put it into practice. Now, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's the answer to anything that we think is the problem out here. It's never, this is always a trigger that's reminding us of what we fear about ourselves. And the course is to lift that fear from off of quite literally our broken hearts about what we fear we have done to ourselves and others. And it's a big lie. It's impossible for us to ruin what we really are. But if you think I'm only a body and I'm a personality and I'm my actions and words, of course we're going to be confused. So this is about removing the confusion, setting up the situation as it actually is, not as we have learned it is, because as we've learned it, we're just kind of stuck with no good answers, trying to fix a problem at the level of the problem that never works. So that's the answer to your question.
And it didn't sound long-winded. And I heard you just say, the outer world can trigger your inner woundedness or inner blocks to love's presence. So when you're triggered by the outer world, what a wonderful opportunity to say thank you for this opportunity to heal.
Yes. In fact, it takes a while to be able to be sincere in being truly grateful for the people who enter our lives that we presume are a nuisance, or that they're not behaving the way we think they should, one way or the other. But at some point when you realize, oh my gosh, having these people in our lives is the best thing that could ever happen. They're helping me on my fast track. Their, whatever we consider their bad behavior, is an opportunity for me to hasten my own healing, because their bad behavior is only a mirror of my own. And so it allows me, okay, this is an opportunity presented at my doorstep right here and now to be kinder to myself, to them, to allow healing across the board.
So we were talking before I hit the go live button about the fact that, well, anyone that has studied A Course in Miracles has been, connected to your work and to your name and to your love. And we think you've been to all but one of these conferences. And I have the description. I have a registration link there on Facebook Live, so we want you to hit that button and then come spend 90 minutes with Carol. I believe it's Sunday, April 24th at 3 p.m. And I have the description of your session in front of me, and I was just laughing because when we first started talking, one of the first things you said was, how could I force myself to do the lessons? Or I can't seem to force myself to do the lessons. And I just kept thinking, well, who's forcing who, right? And you were just even talking about in your presentation this idea of two selves, the capital S self and the little s self. And I didn't know if you wanted to tell people a little bit about what they uh, what they will expect or what they will step into when they come and uh, and say yes to attending your session and inviting their friends. You know, they could pass that registration link on to everyone.
Well, and in a sense, there's been a bit of a preview of coming attractions, which is we have not doubted that the body personality is pretty much the sum total of what we are. That there's at some point it doesn't exist, and then it does for a little while, and then it goes away. In other words, our entire worldview of the little ego self, that's really a story that we've made up. And again, a very short preview of coming attractions. Like if you go, you mean this is a story? It's like, yes, where does the story come from? It comes from, and I will talk about this in more detail, this is the time and space part of this. The cosmic part is we, shall we say, enter into this experience because we know that we need to do this to continue our own, we will call it our own healing or our own change of mind, however you want to state that. But at the human being point of view, until we're about 3 years old, we only have a functioning right brain. Now, for those of you who might have forgotten, the right brain is intuitive, instinctive. There's no thinking going on. Thinking doesn't happen until we're about 3, when the left brain comes online. Because remember, the only thing that really matters to the young of any species is staying alive, survival. So we're intuitively and instinctively learning what and whom and whatever seems to be safe to go toward. What do I need to recoil from? That seems to be unsafe or hurtful for some reason. And all of this experience is happening with no thinking mind, no ability to consider what's happening. There's no ability to do that. So when about 3, my thinking mind comes online, obviously it's physically present, but not active, I literally start to build a story of me, the small s self, the body personality thing, so to speak. And the roots of that are in those early years when I have a way to recall what's happening or what's going on. But it's kind of like it's in the soil, so to speak, out of which my sense of self grows. And because there's a lot of misinformation, there can't be accurate information when you only have a half a brain functioning and you're an infant. I mean, how could it be accurate? So everybody devises the last magnificent chapter 31 that talks so much about the building of the self concept. It uses that word often in chapter 31 and doesn't use it much up to that point, but it talks about building a story of ourselves, a story of ourselves. That's not who we are, and yet we presume it is. So that's the small s self. And we've thought, well, life is really about the care and maintenance of the story of me, its protection and its promotion. Well, that has nothing to do with the reality of the big S, unlimited, loving, conscious, aware presence that we actually are. And so it's knowing that those two things could not possibly be further apart, yet they appear in the very same place, so to speak. And so our goal is how to relinquish our attachment, so to speak, to the self-concept. This is not about destroying it. It's like moving our sense of identity from a story that I've made up to the experiential truth of what I really am. That would be it in a nutshell.
Yes. I feel like I've been bathing in truth and love, and I'm very, very grateful. I invite everyone to hit the share button on the Facebook post if you're watching us on Facebook, to click the link and register for free. You can attend all the sessions for free live, and to come and spend 90 minutes with Carol Howe at 3 o'clock on Sunday, April 24th. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we
Only that when asked about the general format, these have changed a bit over the presentation times, and that is, I will obviously talk about some of the background of all of this, but I want to leave a substantial amount of time for questions and answers, because there's so much confusion abroad in the land, even among people who've been around the course or other teachings of non-duality for a while, that we need to have some substantial time for people to ask questions. But what about this? What happens here? How does this work? Kind of thing, so that the actual practical application of the ideas has a place to be explored.
What a beautiful gift. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Carol, for spending this time with me. I feel blessed and very grateful. And thank you, everyone who's listening. Again, please register and tell your friends, and we'll see you next weekend. All right. Thank you very much, Carol.
Oh, you're so very welcome. And thank you, everybody, for being here.